Dorina and Shawn, welcome to the Open Door Sisterhood Podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Well, we are excited to be talking to you early in the year as we think about what it means to get healthy. And we are all coming off of a hard year. 2020 brings with it all kinds of grief, and I bet we are all feeling it in our bodies. And often coming off of the holidays already on a typical year, we're feeling it in our bodies, the sitting
Sure.
around and the eating. And so we are excited to be talking with you both about what it means to move well and to move in a way that gets us to a place of health. But before we get into that, we would love to know a little about your family and what prompted you to write this book.
Thanks so much. Yeah. So we have 3 daughters. They are ages 9, 11, and 14. So this year we're straddling elementary, middle school, and high school for the first time. And
It's a fun place, isn't it?
yeah.
It's a lot of driving.
It's a lot of
It is a lot of
driving
driving.
and being more of an advocate than, the person who changes diapers and all of that kind of stuff. So we're definitely transitioning into a new zone of parenting. And just to share a little bit of background of our story, I actually was married to a man named Eric Lee Gilmore. He and I were married for 11 years, and we operated a nonprofit organization in Haiti together. And in 2014, so 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. He was a healthy, athletic guy. He was a runner. We connected because of running. In fact, Eric Lee, Shawn, and I all went on a mission trip to Haiti together years ago, and that's how we all met. And
Oh, wow.
so we have this wild, beautiful redemption story. But Eric Lee went to heaven in September of 2014. And by God's wild grace, I began a really hard journey of grieving with my kids, stepping out of Haiti and our nonprofit ministry because I needed to have some space to heal. And we'll talk a little bit more about the running aspect of that later. But then Shawn came back into my life. He was a good friend of ours for years. He supported our ministry. He was there at my husband's funeral and helped with reading scripture. And we connected later after the funeral. He ended up moving back to California, which is his home. And we got married in January of 2016. So that's a very quick version of our story. A lot to digest, I realize, but I think it's really important context as we talk about running, because running has been, and running or walking, exercise itself has been part of my journey of healing and connecting with God.
Wow. Well, I am excited to hear how that all incorporates. So you said that you were a runner. You've been a runner for a long time, Dorina, and it sounds like Shawn, you have been too. So can you tell us a little bit about your history of how you came into the running world?
Yeah, sure. I started running when I was in middle school. I started doing a couple just local 2-mile road races out in the community. And then it was really in high school when I joined the high school track team and cross country team that I really started getting focused on the sport. And then, eventually I ran a little bit in college for my college teams as well.
And my running journey similarly started when I was a young person. I was a kid. I started running races with my dad. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And so I still remember running this race called the Ridge Run, which was a 10K. It was my first race that I did. And then we did it every year together. And I was a soccer player, so I already kind of had endurance, but this was a special thing that I got to do with my dad. That's where I sort of caught the bug. And then in high school, I was a track and field athlete. So got a taste more of the competition side of running. And then in college and beyond, I've focused a little bit more on the longer distance running races, half marathons. I've done a couple marathons, and then coaching track and field and cross country for our daughters.
Well, you're
Wow.
coaches too, both of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, I didn't realize you were too, Dorina. That's really great. So, as you know, we're in a Healthy Way series, and you really can't do this series without talking about the body. I mean, it's so important when it comes to getting healthy. And we all know it's good for our physical health, but can you talk a little bit about why moving our bodies is essential to getting healthy?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, movement is a pathway to health. It gets the oxygen flowing in your body, it gets your heart pumping, you start to sweat out some toxins that are, that are in your body as well. So really any type of exercise, whether it's running or cycling or swimming, or even if you play other sports, like you may play, soccer or basketball, or just even take
Yoga.
fitness classes at the gym,
Yeah.
that any type of movement really just enhances, well, it increases your heart rate, it elevates it for a specified amount of time, and that just really helps rejuvenate the body.
And I'll just add, I mean, you can tell Shawn's a little bit more of the science guy. He's
Mhm.
into the body and physiological part of it. But I also really believe that God designed us to move. And so it helps us because God designed us that way, that when we move, it strengthens and heals. And that is not just physically, building muscles or losing calories, but also that there is healing that happens in our minds and our spirits when we go out to walk, or when we maybe do a yoga class, or as Shawn mentioned, something at the gym, getting those good endorphins and just being able to connect with God, I think is something that he intentionally designed us for.
And I hear you saying that, just movement in general. So if someone's listening and they think, yeah, I'm not a runner and I'm probably not going to turn into one in 2021, these principles really are just about moving our bodies in a way that elevates our heart rate and gets those endorphins going, that can be so many different things.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and can we just stop for a second? And as a mom, I have kids who are athletes who play competitive sports, and I was not an athlete growing up. So it's been really interesting to me to watch them, and especially during the pandemic when a lot of things shut down. I mean, my kids haven't been to school since last February, essentially,
Oh, wow.
because we've been online, but
Yeah.
they've been able to still play soccer and do some outdoor activities. I can see the benefit for my kids as far as exercise.
Yeah.
As coaches, what do you think of, or what benefits do you see for young people? Before we go into the mom, but just for young people, what's the benefit that we as moms can be encouraging our kids to be moving their bodies to?
Well, I love that you brought up 2021 or 2020 is just, going through the pandemic, because I think it really kind of put a magnifying glass on that idea that movement is really important, especially because so many people were sheltering at home and inside and
Mhm.
doing, school in front of a screen for much of the day. And I believe that getting outside has such a great benefit for the kids too, because it allows them to process, it allows them to open up their minds. Even for my own girls, especially when we were doing our school in the spring, every day we would go for a walk, or they would jump on their bikes and I would run, something like that. And I could just tell that it changed even the way they interacted with each other. They might be, fighting at the dinner table, but as soon as we would go out for a walk, we would be looking at the beautiful roses in our neighborhood and saying hi to people in the community. So I got to see, kind of like you, firsthand, that was making a big difference even in their mental health as well as their physical health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Also, I know that on sometimes on those walks, or if we were trying to get them out to do maybe a little short run or a bike ride, sometimes initially they wouldn't necessarily want to go, but once they get out there, their mood changes and they're like, you know what? This isn't so bad. In fact, I'm actually enjoying it. It's kind of a strange transformation from being, oh, I really don't want to go out. I just want to sit at home and, stare at a screen or do whatever they've been doing. But when you get them out, sometimes, that first step is always the hardest. I always say the first step is the hardest step out the door.
Right. And then I pull that mom move and say, once they're enjoying it, remember how 10 minutes ago you didn't want to do this? Let's remember this next time. Yeah. No, I just wanted to pause for a second there and encourage moms as they're helping their kids get healthy in the new year too, because I do think it's true for everybody, any age, that getting outside and exercising is good for us. Dorina, you mentioned something about just kind of the spiritual element of moving and movement. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about your story and how you had some healing as a result of your running journey?
Yeah, I really believe in the last 6 years since my husband went to heaven that running has become like a spiritual practice to me. And I didn't necessarily have that language or say, oh, I'm going to start this spiritual practice 6 years ago. But because running was already a part of my life, it was already an outlet. And it was something that I had done for years with Eric Lee. It was hard to start after he was gone. It was hard to go back because there was that kind of highlighter over the fact that he was no longer there and I had to go alone. But I did feel like I went through this kind of transformation where I started out running and there was that loneliness of him not being there. And then the more I ran, the more I got out there, the more I realized this is my opportunity to connect with God. It was that place where I would pray, where I would worship. My kids were ages 2, 5, and 8 when their daddy died. So they were real little and I was on call, 24 hours a day, except for those couple of hours on a Saturday that I would go running with my girlfriends. And so that was a place where I was grieving, where I was, crying out and questioning to God, like, why is this even happening? And I believe along the way is where he really showed me that he is present with us in all circumstances. And sometimes it would just be the sweet reminder as I was watching a sunrise or seeing the sparkling waters of a lake, running on some of the trails here in Central California. We have just beautiful displays of his creation. And it was that healing thing for me that I was able to go out. I felt like, okay, I'm moving, I'm doing something. It's not that I wanted to forget about my husband, but that feeling of like, I'm physically moving forward. And it helped kind of provide that pathway for me. So it's kind of like in Psalm 23, where David talks about, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside those still waters. We have this beautiful visual of him connecting with God through creation. And whenever I think of that Psalm, I think, that's what I experience when I'm out on the trail, when I'm running. For me also, just because of the way I'm wired, I needed to be moving. And other friends who are widows or who are grieving, maybe there's something different that they needed to do, like say gardening or painting or something else creative. But for me to move was that way that I could connect with God.
It's interesting. I've had 2 friends who have had a similar experience, and like you, I mean, everyone has their own individual journey. One of them, she felt like she was bottoming out in her career. She was a smoker. She was just really struggling, and she just said, okay, I'm going to start running. And she started with a quarter of a mile. And she lives in New York. And so she slowly started just running more and more through Central Park. That was her route.
Yeah.
And it literally changed her life. I mean, she stopped smoking. She got healthy. She got a new job. In fact, she started working at Real Simple magazine, became one of their main editors. I mean, it was like, it completely changed her life. And then my other friend, she had gone through a divorce. She was really, really sad, and she was just in a pit. And her mom said, she was over at her mom's house, and she said, I don't want to talk to you about this one more time until you go for a run. Kind of that tough love of you're in a pit and we got to do something different here. And so she started running. And again, it completely changed her life. And I mean, it's just so interesting that, I mean, I just think it's so true that we're integrated beings. And to think that our body is separate from our emotions is lying to ourselves, because it's not. And not only that, but neurologically, we have to have a release for that really heavy emotion. And if we're not moving our bodies and actually releasing that neurologically, we're just holding all of that in. And that's really damaging. And also that coping mechanism. You know, Alex and I talk all the time about the neuroscience of, you know, trauma recovery is you have to get both sides of the brain moving, and how naturally when we're walking and exercising, like you're naturally doing that. You're going back and forth and rocking the brain. Isn't that fascinating? All that stuff, Shawn, I'm kind of seeing that you're resonating with me right here.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen so much transformation happen between people who have adopted running or a, you know, health focused lifestyle. I know throughout the years, I've coached many people, and I always think back to, although I wasn't one of the team and training coaches, I did put on various running clinics and apparel clinics, because I used to own a collection of running specialty stores. And so I used to do these clinics for team and training. And what team and training is that they are a fundraising group for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. And there used to be just thousands of team and training members. Back about, I'd say 15 to 20 years ago. I think it's a little bit smaller segment of people now. But then we would see people who, you know, going through a divorce, going through hard times, and decide to sign up for team and training. And there they gain the confidence. They just all of a sudden have this confidence, you know, 3 months later that, you know, just wasn't present before, you know, and they found community by joining team and training group with their, you know, with the coaches and the other team members. And then they'd be able to have the confidence to go out and establish other goals in their lives in other areas of their lives, both career and social as well.
Can you talk about what your process was when you would start with somebody like that who maybe wasn't an athlete growing up and thought, I am not a runner, but I'm going to show up to this thing because somebody invited me to? And we may have a listener who's thinking, maybe I could do that. What are your baby steps, suggestions for somebody who might feel like they're starting at ground zero?
Yeah, well, I always like to tell people that there is a runner inside of all of us. Whether or not you admit it, whether or not you recognize it, deep down, there is a runner inside all of us, because we were, as Dorina said, you know, we were just crafted and molded to move. I mean, that's how we were designed. But for someone who's just starting out, I'd like to, you know, I tell them, just start walking. You know, first off, walking. You maybe walk 3 times a week, you know, just try to make it a mile if that's all you can do, or half a mile. You know, find your limit. And once you find kind of where, you know, your limit is, then each time, you know, over the course of weeks and months, you want to be able to expand and push that limit upwards. So if you just can walk a mile, then just walk a mile. You know, maybe a week or 2 later, you may be able to say, run for 10 seconds or even 20 seconds, you know, then you can walk for a couple minutes and then throw in another short run for 10 or 20 seconds, and just keep repeating until you complete that mile. And eventually you're going to extend it to where you're going 1.5 miles, 2 miles, and maybe even 3 miles. And then over time, you can also incorporate or just extend that running period, you know, make the running more and the walking less, until eventually you'll be able to run, you know, 2 miles straight or even 3 miles.
That's endurance building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's baby steps, you know.
Does that Couch to 5K app, does that really work? That Couch to 5K? Have you heard of that app?
I haven't used it before, but I know a lot of people who have, and I think they incorporate similar concepts to what Shawn's describing. He does planning for. He puts together these workout plans to help people. So we train a team every fall that runs a local half marathon. So we start out, maybe running. The longest is 1 or 2 miles that first week, and then we build upon that, which is similar to what they do, I think, in the Couch to 5K as well. You just get to see that growth and progress, and slowly you're building up your muscles and your endurance along the way.
Do you have that online where people can do that virtually, or is it just in person at this point?
Actually, the workout plans are at the back of our new book, so people could use them in anywhere they are. And then we do have a local race that we just have trained people for, but we have a Facebook group called the Glory Chasers Christian Running Group. And it's a place where we do provide free coaching for people. We encourage them to do different types of races. And it's a community space where people share, pictures of God's glory that they see on the trail. And they can ask Shawn questions about, injuries and different types of things that are related to running and walking.
So talk to us a little bit about, you've mentioned a few times the community aspect of running, but also just as a couple, how that can be something that you share and is bonding as a couple. So can you speak to how you could maybe use that in the new year for your marriage?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, I think it's a great way to connect. And that's one of the things, as I even go back to part of my grief journey, I needed people. And so going out with my friends once a week was so life-giving. And then I also needed that solitude that I was talking about. So Shawn and I do like to run together. We do it maybe once a week.
Yeah, once a week.
And it is a time for us that we connect. I mean, obviously he's running a lot slower when he goes with me. He matches my pace, or he'll run just ahead of me and kind of pace me, but it's a great time for us to connect. And I have seen it be a really life-giving thing for a lot of couples. In fact, we have several friends who became couples because they were runners and met through running. And that's actually one of the big connections that, he and I had as well. He started to just encourage me in my running as I was trying to get back into it.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to my time with Dorina running along the trails that we have here in Central California. I mean, it's a good time just for us to talk. Sometimes if we're trying to plan out the year or plan out the day or week or whatever it is, we can talk about plans, talk about our dreams, kind of vision for our life. And we go on these, what we call them, run dates. And it's just a great time to be able to spend with each other. And it helps us to be able to talk about some of these topics outside the house where there are lots of distractions. We're, bombarded with, questions from our kids and them needing help. And there's, lots of screens in the house that we can be distracted by. But, running, you just forego all those items and you definitely can focus more on each other.
Yeah, I would say for my husband and I, we do that hiking. So we're not running. It's not a run for us, but actually we have so many mountains in our area that we just hike. And that's really our conversation place,
Absolutely.
So I think it's just that concept of kind of getting away from distractions, getting outside, moving our bodies together, and that can be a really bonding thing. Can you talk a little bit about prayer and how you have incorporated prayer in your running? Because, okay, here's what I've heard runners or non-runners who are trying to run say, and that is, I'm so focused on how tired I am that I can't really pray because I'm just tired and I'm just trying to keep running. So help us a little bit with how you make that transition mentally.
Well, I'll give a couple of examples because I can relate to that thing of just being so tired that, it's hard to focus on anything. But I think kind of through the years, I've also trained myself. And prayer, we can have an expanded view of what that looks like, right? So if I'm running, maybe I'm just talking to God about my day. I'm talking to him about the things I'm concerned about. that to me is prayer. That's communing with him. That's worshiping. I have a devotional in our new book that talks about praying while running, and just that, as it says in Ephesians 6, that, we can pray in the Spirit on all different occasions, and there's all kinds of prayers and requests that we can bring to him. And so it's that intentionality of like, I'm going to go out on a run, but I'm going to focus during this time on just praying. And honestly, it's actually a good way to keep your mind busy. If you are feeling that tired, fatigued, my body is hurting. For me, when I have done some different races, like the half marathon is probably my favorite race to do, which is 13 miles. Typically, and I've talked to other people about this too, around mile 10 is where you do something called hitting the wall. You hit the wall and you just feel like, oh my goodness, I cannot go on. There's actually some things that happen in our brains and our bodies that we start to shut down at that point in a race. And yet you're already committed. You've gone 10 miles. So it's not like you can turn around. You want to finish. And so what I try to do at mile 10 consistently as I'm training or running a half marathon is I call it a gratitude mile. And I'm just going to spend mile 10 in gratitude. So whether I'm running with a buddy and saying it out loud, or even just in my heart saying, okay, Lord, I'm thankful for this. I'm grateful for this. I'm looking around me at things in creation that I'm thankful for. I'm thinking about things from my own life and my day. And just even that practice of gratitude, which is, I consider a prayer, can lift our mood and can actually take us out of that space with the negative self-talk and go into a space of, okay, I'm going to get to the finish line. I'm going to get to mile 13.
Yeah. And I would say for myself, I love to pray when I'm running, just because, when I get out there, there's less distractions. It's an opportunity for me to declutter my brain of all these various items that really, it's things like my to-do list, my, just all the stresses and worries. I can just let them go. And it's with running, it just clears my mind, allows me to be able to hear God's kind of quiet voice oftentimes. And for when I'm racing, because I race marathons and I used to race triathlons. I haven't done that for a little while, but I find when I'm pushing myself to my limit, when I'm tired, when I'm fatigued, that I feel that that's the point when I'm most dependent on God. So that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm praying about is that, okay, God, it's less of me, more of you, and allowing myself to be more dependent on God, because I don't have the strength anymore when I'm at my max, at a max effort. I don't have the strength anymore to carry myself further. So then I become more reliant on God. And that's just kind of a prayer. Okay, God, sustain me for this last mile of the race, or, whatever it is.
One thing I've learned too about my husband, he's more of an introverted personality. And so I need to empower him as his wife to go on those runs. So he has that space to pray and declutter his mind and to process. So we do like to run together, but almost every other day of the week, I'm encouraging him to go out, and he's very self-motivated, for him to be able to have that time, because he lives in a house with 4 girls. So he has to listen to lots of talking otherwise.
Yeah. And I would think too, just the rhythm of running or walking helps kind of reset your mind as you're thinking through all of those things. Like Krista said, it's that back and forth, but just also that steady pace allows you maybe to start letting your mind flow to places that you weren't expecting. I know in the creative process, a lot of people say, get out and move your body and just kind of let your mind go where it will. And I would think that would be true with prayer as well. Just let your mind go where it will. I'm hearing life lessons in the physical training component that you're talking about, both goal setting as far as start small and then push yourself. And then also On the other end, when you push yourself to a point of discomfort or the end of your limit, that is also a spiritual experience. That's when we can rely on God. I've heard you mention injuries a couple of times. How do you suggest dealing with disappointment or injuries in your training, and how does that apply to kind of the greater life lessons that we get when we're doing physical training?
Mm.
Well, when I'm coaching athletes and they tell me that they're injured and they're not able to run or run as much or even run at all, I always try to focus them back on, okay, let's focus on what you can do. You know, can you do some core work? You may not be able to run as fast. Can you walk? And just focus on what you can do versus rather than focusing on what you can't do. And also, it could be a good time to work on your core. It could be a good time maybe to work on a little bit of, you know, more upper body exercises that you didn't do before. It could be a good time of learning as well. Maybe start studying about running technique or walking technique, or, you know, just things, you know, reading up about running itself to become more knowledgeable that you can put into practice when you are healthy and can get back out there running.
I think one of the things with injuries too is that there's really a battle of the mind that happens. I can think of a couple of summers ago, I had a back injury. So my lower back was really hurting me whenever I would go out to run. And it just was excruciating and it was hard. And running had always been that place, as I've described before, where I did have that respite and prayer connection with God. So I was just sad and miserable that I couldn't get out to run because of that injury. And I think through that experience, it also kind of taught me that, you know, some of the work that we have to do is battling that negative self-talk, even giving ourselves permission to grieve when we have, you know, injuries. I mean, we're getting older, so we're always talking about like, okay, now that we're getting older, the recovery time, it takes a little bit longer after doing races. And then even embracing rest. I think rest is a really important part of movement, which sounds kind of funny to say. Like some people think I'm crazy that running is resting, but I think as athletes and just as human beings that we need to embrace rest. And that's actually so hard for us. But we can't perform and our muscles can't grow and we can't heal from injuries unless we take those times to rest, whether it's a rest day per week or a rest cycle that's part of your year. That's something that we talk about with our friends and athletes a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. My son's a really competitive golfer, and last summer he was golfing like 8 hours a day. I mean, when I say he's like, and this is self-motivated, I mean, it is not from us at all. And you know, I just kept saying to him, you have to build in this rest. I was worried about his burnout. I was worried about his injury, his back. I mean, he's only in high school, but I'm worried about, you know, the constant repetitive motion of his back, you know, all of that. And it's interesting because finally, I mean, he was totally pushing back, but finally he said, okay, Mom, you're right. I need to take a few weeks off, because I think he was feeling burnout. And it just was amazing what happened during that 3 weeks that he finally took a rest. And it's just that Sabbath concept, you know, that God didn't build us for constant pressing, striving, you know, that we have to have a rhythm of rest in there, or that's where we have, you know, burnout and fatigue, and where we start to become discouraged. And even I would say our performance goes down. You know, like with my son, I would say he was working so hard on these various things of golf that I really don't understand, that his performance was going down because he was over practicing almost those things. And so it's just so important that we do embrace that concept of rest. And I think just and for many of us whose personalities are that way, we just are strivers, you know, and we have to fight that tendency, because that's important too. Well, thank you so much. As we are headed into 2021, what advice would you give, maybe from both of you, just your last piece of advice for our listeners?
Yeah, for 2021, I mean, one of the main things is, as I think referenced earlier, is just start with that first step, because once you start with the first step, then take another, and then take another, because eventually you keep linking step after step after step. It can carry you a long ways.
Mm. And I'll just piggyback on that in a similar vein, just saying that showing up matters.
Absolutely.
Being able to show up matters. And I think a lot of times we put these expectations on ourselves, or we try to make these goals that are very high to, hard to achieve. And really it's about showing up. And so if you can make it doesn't have to be like this New Year's resolution thing that we put so much into that. But if you make it a part of your rhythm, that maybe you go for a walk in the evenings with your family, or 3 days a week you're going to run. And obviously you have to look at your schedule. Every week is a little bit different. But I think that idea of showing up matters. And no matter what age we're at, the showing up part is possible. There are times when, we might have injuries, or as we get older, where there's things that we can't do when we were younger, but we can always show up. And I always try to encourage people with that concept, because as we've talked about a lot, those baby steps are how you get started. And it may be the way that you discover, a new hobby, a new thing that you like to do, a new way that you would like to move, or a new opportunity for you to do something together as a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And model those healthy habits to your kids too, which is so important. Well, thank you both so much for coming on today. This has been such a great inspirational interview as people look forward to how they want to maybe reboot their bodies in the new year. So thank you so much, Dorina and Shawn. And we wish you the very best with your book and your running and all that you're doing.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.